Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Abhinaya. I'm a PhD student at NC State, and today I'll be talking about our work on investigating harassment and safety in VR. We all know virtual reality is this emerging technology that transports a user into a whole new three-dimensional space where they can interact with other users, play multiplayer games, stream content, and so on. But I want to highlight some unique aspects of VR. VR enables something called haptic feedback. Say you're a user and you're interacting with another user in VR and you're sharing a high five. Your physical hand in the physical world can experience this because of haptic feedback. Now, this is facilitated by the controllers that you can see in this picture, but VR users also wear specialized haptic vests and haptic suits to experience this. Apart from this, VR also provides full body tracking and provides an overall immersive experience. But this immersion also increases the potential for harassment. Harassment has been a problem in VR for quite a while, and one of the earlier publicized instances of this in recent past has been in 2016, where a female user of a VR app was groped by a male user of the same app in virtual space. In this blog article, she talks about how the user identified her to be a female and then groped her. And she also talks about how realistic and traumatizing that whole experience was. There have been several other instances since then. You may wonder what is so new about harassment in VR. After all, harassment and online abuse has been around ever since the dawn of the internet. That is indeed true, and there has been a large body of work done in this domain, but the immersion, embodiment, and haptic feedback that VR provides amplifies certain types of these attacks, especially those that involve spatial elements like virtual violence or virtual sexual harassment. To enable users to deal with harassment, VR app developers have come up with safety controls. Muting, blocking, proximity setting are just some of these safety controls. But the thing is, the set of these controls is not standardized across VR applications. And even when you look at one of these safety controls, the implementation can vary greatly from one application to another. So we wanted to understand how usable these controls are and whether they are effective at helping people deal with harassment. With that, we set out conducting two studies. First, we interviewed people who had experienced harassment in VR so that we can get first-hand understanding of the usability and effectiveness of safety controls at the time of harassment. We also wanted to understand what are the challenges in designing safety controls in the first place. For that, we conducted interviews with VR developers. I'll talk a little bit about our study design. For the first study, where we interviewed targets of VR-based harassment, we consulted a psychology expert who helped us design the screening and the interview protocols. And they helped us rephrase questions that were sensitive and talking about the harassment experience of the participant. And they advised us to exclude those who had undergone emotional distress or post-traumatic stress disorder so that we minimize the risk to our participants. In the interviews, we asked the participant to first describe what kind of harassment they had experienced in VR, and then we asked them about what kind of safety controls they used and whether they reported the harasser. And finally, we asked them about their expectations for enhancing safety in VR. Two researchers conducted qualitative coding and thematic analysis to arrive at the insights. We used these insights to design the next study where we interviewed VR developers. In these semi-structured interviews, we asked the participant about their VR development experience. Then we presented some of the challenges that users mentioned in study 1 and asked them how they would solve those. Then we asked them about the challenges that they faced in implementing VR safety features. And finally, asked them to comment on the feasibility of user-desired safety features from study 1. We again used a similar procedure to arrive at the results. We talk about a lot of results in our paper, but for the sake of time, I'll talk just about a few of these. For the first study, we interviewed 18 participants, and we asked them about the effectiveness of safety controls. We found that safety controls can be ineffective in many ways. First, they fail to provide any kind of feedback to the problematic user. See, someone is bothering you and you mute them or you block them. But if they don't have any idea that they've been muted or blocked and they just continue doing whatever they're doing, it does not provide any feedback that their behavior is not okay. So this was one way in which safety controls can be ineffective. Then, in certain implementations of the block feature, where you point at a problematic user and make them disappear from your view, we found that it does not remove the avatar, but changes the appearance of the avatar. Say you block someone because they're following you around in virtual space, and you block them and they become something else, but that new appearance is just following you around, which kind of ruins the whole user experience. In another case, safety controls also affect communication with non-harassers. Say you're a user entering a social VR space and you're looking to interact with some new people. But some of them are being problematic, so you try to mute them. But you're finding it difficult to mute each one individually, so you end up muting everybody in the room because there's a mute all feature. So that effectively prevents you from doing what you want to do. We also find that safety controls can be misused to cause further harassment, and overall, they prevent or stop further instances of harassment. Then we asked users about reporting mechanisms and how easy they are to use. We find that they can be time-consuming and cumbersome to use if they have to type out what happened in the report using the virtual keyboard in VR, where they point their controller and type each letter individually. Or if they're a new user and they have no idea how the reporting mechanism works for that app. Or if video evidence is required. So here, one of our participants spoke about how they had to record the whole incident and then edit it so that it is short and can be easily reviewed by a moderator. And then they had to submit an email to submit the report. After talking about the usability of these controls, we finally asked the users what they wanted for a safer VR experience. They wanted in-app interventions that can tell them if there are going to be some problematic users in a VR space that they are about to enter. Then they wanted age-based user segregation where adults can interact with adults, kids can interact with kids, and so on. Then they wanted live moderation, which means a VR security guard that they can just call for assistance anytime. Then they want automatic detection of harassment, automatic detection of distress, and tracking users' toxicity behavior across VR apps so that when some kind of action is taken in one app, it can just be applied on all other apps. As researchers and engineers, we wondered if some of these solutions could be implemented feasibly. So that's what we asked the VR developers. In study 2, we interviewed 9 VR developers with a wide range of backgrounds. Some of them were UI UX designers for VR applications, some of them were AR VR researchers, and one of them was the founder of a VR-based game. So we got rich insights from this study. On the feasibility of user-desired features, they felt that live moderation was impractical at scale and required a huge human resource. And they felt that it was sustainable only through moderators who were embedded in the VR community, but they felt that it could be augmented by automated ways to detect abuse. On tracking users' toxicity behavior, they acknowledged the infringement of users' privacy in this process, but they felt that it could be done if it was confined to a single platform, such as Meta or Steam. For detecting distress in users, developers questioned whether the VR system would have sufficient input to accurately detect distress, because there can be some users who wear just a headset and controller, and there can be others who have additional trackers on their body. So the level of input provided to the system can vary greatly. For age-based segregation, a potential solution was a non-invasive third-party verification of ages and then grouping the users based on this information. Now, developers also shared some of the challenges that they faced in designing safety controls. The main challenge was that designing for safety was not prioritized by VR companies because there's a lack of financial incentive, because they would rather focus on developing the main features of the app due to the high development costs. Then there is a lack of awareness among VR developers about the safety risks in VR. Now, this may stem from the fact that some of them are independent developers, some of them are from larger studios, but not all developers are equally aware of the potential safety risks to users. They also lack legal and technical guidelines for safety design. So someone who's just starting out as a hobby developer may not have any idea on how to go about these. Some developers also mentioned challenges in user testing of these safety controls. Now, these safety controls are supposed to be employed when the user is going through some stressful conditions. So how would they recruit participants and put them through these stressful conditions and test these controls? This was something that a lot of developers mentioned. And finally, all the developers acknowledged the trade-off between safety and privacy, because to ensure safety, you also have to compromise on privacy. Based on our results, we came up with some recommendations for the stakeholders in the VR community. VR app developers can develop open source safety libraries that can be integrated into game engines so that other VR developers can just make use of these while coming up with new applications. VR platform owners, on the other hand, can standardize the baseline safety controls and reporting mechanisms so that when a new app gets published, it's just easy for that to adhere to these guidelines. Policymakers can work on developing regulations for code of conduct and moderation in VR spaces to streamline this whole process. App developers and platform owners together can identify better ways to inform VR users about the existing safety controls, because what we find is a lot of users are not aware of these safety controls in the first place. Platform owners and policymakers can work hand in hand and develop technical and legal guidelines for mandating the standards for VR safety. And finally, app developers and policymakers can identify ethical ways for testing these safety controls. With that, I come to the end of my talk, and thank you for your time.